Welcome back to the Chronicles of the King podcast, where we take a deep dive into the life and legacy of Elvis Presley. I'm Megan.
And I'm Tessa, and we are two 20-something Elvis fans dedicated to keeping his legacy alive with a research-based approach.
Whether you're a diehard Elvis fan or simply curious about a man who changed the course of music and culture, you're in the right place.
We are here to unpack the myths, explore the music, and get to the heart of Elvis's enduring impact.
Every other week, we'll bring you research, untold stories, and fresh perspectives on Elvis's journey. From his humble beginnings to his legendary performances, we're here to shed light on it all.
So settle in for a podcast made with a lot of TLC for the man himself, one story at a time. Hey, hi guys. We're so excited about today's episode. We're going to be talking about Lisa Marie, Elvis's only daughter. And just to kind of preface this, there will be spoilers for the new memoir that just came out, From Here to the Great Unknown, which is a collaboration between Lisa Marie and her daughter, Riley Keough, just so you guys know. And something that was really important to us is that we used Lisa's words as much as possible, whether that be her lyrics or her writing or Riley's writing from the memoir. We just felt like it was really important for this episode, especially that the book just came out, to use as much of the content as we could. Yeah.
So kind of what Tessa was saying, we're using a lot of Lisa Marie's words. You know, we read a lot of Elvis books. I run an Elvis book club. I got a lot of help with that from Tessa. So we always get to hear about Elvis from other people's perspectives. So doing this mostly with Lisa's own words from her memoir, because again, spoilers, it's a little bit different this time. So that's why, because we have access to them, we wanted to do it this way instead of just using outside sources or what other people had to say about her.
And also, I feel like her life was, after reading the book, it was like her life was so crazy, and so much of it was in the public eye and in tabloids and front page newspapers, just because of the fact she was Elvis's daughter, that it was important to us to kind of like use her own experiences of it. Also, Miss Kitty had something to say just then, I think.
Yeah.
And also, Megan and I did not plan to be wearing the same sweatshirt today.
We share a mind at this point.
I know. Really, when we were doing this episode, we were like, yeah, we have it.
Yep, we're good.
All right, so you want to start us off with some basic info about Miss Lisa Marie?
A long episode. We have a lot of information to share, so we're going to try to keep it not as chatty as maybe like the last episode was about the Presleys. So we're going to try to keep this, under control. Okay. So a little bit of background information about Lisa Marie. She was born February 1st, 1968 to Elvis and Priscilla Presley in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, she is the only child of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. She is also the mother of 4 children, Riley Keough, Ben Keough, and her twins, Harper and Finley Lockwood. She is also a grandmother of Riley's daughter, her first child, Tupelo. And she was also, these are more things we're going to get into, but she was married 4 times. And as Elvis's only child, she was the subject to constant criticism from the press over all these different issues we're going to cover.
Right. So first thing we're going to talk a little bit about is her early childhood. So Lisa was born in Memphis, and she grew up at Graceland and other houses that Elvis owned, like the Hillcrest House and the Holmby Hills home. Her parents got divorced in 1973 when Lisa was 5 years old. And this is just a little quotation from her book where she says, quote, "I was 4 when they split up, but I remained so close with my dad. I knew how much I was adored, how much he loved me. I knew that he knew that I hated leaving him. Hated going to my mother's new home in Los Angeles. Loathed it. He got a house there to be closer to me."
Yeah, so after their divorce, Lisa Marie is spending a lot more time with her mother and not as much time as Graceland as she would preferred. And she always says, like, as a child, she always wanted to be at Graceland instead of LA. And about Graceland, she said, when you were there, you could feel it. You'd feel good and recharged. And that's from her new memoir.
Yeah. And some of the reasons she enjoyed being at Graceland included the fact that it was kind of a lawless land.
Yep.
Her dad was not strict on her really at all. And she felt, as she describes in her book, that, her mother was a little bit stricter, but that at her dad's, it was like a free for all.
Yeah.
So she had a lot of fun there. And one of the main things she did that was super fun was riding around in a golf cart Elvis had gotten for her, which was baby blue and had her name painted on the side.
Yeah, and so she talks a lot about kind of the demolition derby that they've made the front lawn of Graceland into. And in her memoir, she says, "My friends and I would tear up the lawn with them, crash them into each other, or try to decapitate the golf carts, not people, by running into tree branch. Full on demolition derby all day long. I would drive one full speed through a fence, and the next morning it looked like nothing had happened. I was wild."
So she was pretty wild, but it seems like her dad didn't really do much to chastise her, but just kind of like let her be crazy. So sometimes it was an adjustment to go back to her mom's house in LA when she had been used to driving around in the golf cart going crazy and having a lot of fun. So something else, since this is actually our final episode on our series about Elvis's family, we wanted to talk about some of the family members that we've discussed in previous episodes. And, they were around Lisa at Graceland and just kind of her perception of them, what she had to say about her relationship to them.
Yeah, and these are a little bit new to us. So when we did this, like the memoir hadn't come out yet. So we're now getting new perspectives on things. And so we did talk a little bit about Dodger, but we included a little bit more this week. So Lisa Marie always said that, no, not Dodger, Delta, two D's getting them mixed up. We mentioned Delta last week. So Dodger, we didn't get a lot of information about, but as for Lisa Marie, she doesn't say very much about Dodger, but she does recall one incident with a horse that I think most people will recognize. And about this, she says, "He was leading me through Graceland on that pony, right through the house. Everyone was excited, making commotion, and Dodger was shouting, 'What the hell is going on out there?' And right at that moment, the horse stopped and decided to relieve himself right outside Dodger's room."
Yeah, I like this story because I think it shows, I think she says in the book that, her dad got her this horse for like no particular reason. And that it just kind of paints this picture of like a land without rules where, of Graceland, where a horse is like walking through the house. And
only at Graceland would you do that.
Right. And then you picture Dodger being like, "What the hell?"
I know. But I feel like also from this story, Lisa Marie kind of paints like there was a bit of like a panic, like, oh my gosh, like Elvis didn't want Dodger to see what was going on. So I was like, quick, get the horse out of the house.
Right. But that, she looked back on it as like just like a silly moment with her dad being kind of childlike. It was very like a lot of these stories about her father were very sweet.
They were.
So to talk a little bit more about some of the Presley family, Aunt Delta. So Elvis's Aunt Delta, his father's sister. I think we used this quotation last time when we talked about the Presley aunts, uncles, and cousins. And Lisa says that Delta, quote, was a wild card. She had a horrible mouth and was very vocal about everything. She didn't have a lot of good things to say, but she was very, very funny. And just to give another side of, Delta's kind of characterized as a bit of like a hardy and kind of like, like a hard ass. Like she was, funny, but had a sharp tongue.
Exactly.
But also we saw a nice, a softer side of her when we explored some of that and her taking care of her mother, Dodger, Minnie Mae. And Lisa says something similar that one year for Christmas, her great Aunt Delta bought her Elton John records because she knew that Lisa was a fan of Elton John. And Elvis was like, "Who the hell is this guy? Like, who are you getting these records? Why are you getting these records for her?" And recently at Graceland for the celebration of the book release, they put out those records that Aunt Delta had bought for her, which I thought was really special.
Really cool. It's really cool that they're still around. And that's why I love so much about like the Graceland archives. always keeping those family treasures. So the next one we're going to talk about is Vernon. And so Vernon was somebody we didn't, because of the date the book was released, we didn't have this information about him. But so Lisa Marie says that she and Vernon were not very close. There was always a bit of a distance between them. She really saw him more as an authority figure. And one quote she says about him is, he would tell me I shouldn't stay up late and that I shouldn't eat cookies all day and night. I mean, he was right, but I didn't care. I didn't like anybody tell me what to do. And just like showing his authority, I feel like when Elvis was around, he was like, you know what? Be a kid. Be a kid. I don't care. It's Graceland. Have a good day. But I think everybody else around him was more grounded in reality, I guess you could say, and was like, okay, we need some rules. We need some structure. And Aunt Delta was one of those other people like we talked about last week.
Right. And I think Lisa talks about Joe Esposito, who was one of the Memphis Mafia members, Vernon and Delta as being people who kind of like enforced rules, but that she was very like against that. And so as a child, she didn't really like people telling her what to do. And she was like, well, you're not my dad, so you can't tell me what to do.
I can have you fired.
Yeah, she would like threaten to get people fired. So about Vernon, she also says, quote, I couldn't get away with much when Vernon was around. I wasn't close to him. I would avoid him at all costs. I wish I'd had a different relationship with my grandfather, but I just kind of hid from him. And she also says, I had no emotional connection to him whatsoever. And I never got past that with him, which just reading that, it was a little sad. I think
it was.
It felt like, you know, she did regret that, especially Vernon passed away in 1979, only 2 years after her father passed away. And so I think, you know, she wanted to be closer to that side of the family. And she seems to regret.
Which again, also like reflecting back onto our episode about Vernon and his parents, we got the perspectives from his siblings, we got the perspectives from like people of the Memphis Mafia. And so it's just really interesting to kind of like build on Vernon's character and being like, you know what, there wasn't really like he couldn't really form an emotional connection with maybe his granddaughter. She couldn't really form an emotional connection with him. So it's just interesting to get that additional perspective. But I think she feels definitely different about Patsy.
Oh, 100%.
Oh, yeah, 100%. About Patsy, she always says that they were really close, that she was almost like her surrogate mother, and that, you know, whenever she went to Memphis, that's who she was with most of the time.
Right. So Patsy is Elvis's...
she's not very active, I feel like. Yeah.
Is Elvis's double first cousin, who we talked about. And so in her book, Lisa says that her Aunt Delta always sort of referred to Patsy as like a surrogate mother to her, to Lisa. And also Lisa and Patsy's daughter, Dina Gamble, were very close. Yep. Like you said, Lisa would stay with Patsy whenever she would visit Memphis after Elvis's passing. And this is just a little quotation. She says, every Christmas, Easter, and summertime, I'd stay with Patsy. It meant so much to be part of that family. So obviously Lisa, just like Elvis, was very close to her family. Maybe not Vernon, but, you know, they were around. Yeah. And because they were so present in Elvis's life and at Graceland, they were present in her life too. But like we said, she seemed to be closer to one side than the other. So
yes. And I just kind of like Elvis was, I feel like what we said, a little bit closer to maybe the Presley side of the family versus the Smith side, even though there were more Smiths. But Lisa Marie says, I was very much in love with my father's side. They were wildly colorful people, and I related to them in ways I couldn't with my mother. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's that Southern feeling or Southern hospitality feeling, I guess you could call it, that she just resonated with more.
Right. And just, I think if, you know, when you're looking back at the way just that like your different parents parent and, you know, it must have felt like, oh, I have so much freedom. And I, you know, even if it's not actually like the best parenting, you know, that like there were no rules being sort of enforced.
You have a more positive feeling for it.
Right. Especially in like looking back, like rose-colored glasses almost.
Exactly.
and she loved Memphis because it
Mhm.
was, her father. And so I think that definitely has something to do with it. And her love for Memphis, she talks a lot, with like great admiration for her time at when she lived at
Mhm.
Graceland, both before and after Elvis passed away.
Yep.
And after Elvis passed away in 1977, she really felt connected to Memphis. And I
Mhm.
just think that's really interesting that, she grew up in Memphis and LA, but that she always felt connected to Memphis. And that was
Yep.
because of her father.
Which maybe just remind me that was her nickname. Memphis was her nickname given to her
Yep.
by Jerry Schilling. It's
Yep.
very
I love
fitting.
that.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about Lisa and Elvis's connection. So we talked a little bit about her early childhood. Now we're going to focus laser in on their connection personally.
Mm-hmm.
So would you like to start?
Sure.
All right.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that Elvis and Lisa did together.
Mm-hmm.
So Elvis passed away when she was only 9 years old.
Yep.
And, you know, Lisa's book is the first time we get from her perspective, like a deeper account of her
Mm-hmm.
relationship with her father. And the majority of her special memories with her dad occurred upstairs at Graceland. So that's the title of the first chapter of the
Mm-hmm.
book, because it was such a special place for the two of them. And Lisa says, the top floor of Graceland was just his suite and my room, and that's it. Even as a child, I knew this was super special. Nobody, aside from maybe a girlfriend, had one-on-one access like that. Um, and I just think it's kind of like a little sanctuary. And it,
That's what I was going to say.
like reading this, I felt like more understanding
Mm-hmm.
of why, like maybe, tours are like not allowed upstairs in a way like that. It was so
I
special.
did
And
too.
yeah, not just for Elvis, but for Lisa too. And especially when she was still here with us, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that was
Like
like
I
her
can
place
see
with her
like she
dad.
has a personal tie to upstairs. It's something maybe she doesn't want. I mean, anybody who's like looked into, I guess, the history of like Graceland, like being brought for tour purposes, like the modifications that they did, I can see maybe, I don't want people up there just because I don't want any modifications done. I just don't want anything tampered with. Like that's my
Right.
space. That's where I feel at home.
Right.
So we definitely understand that a lot more. But even after Elvis's passing, even when she came into adulthood, she would still go back to Graceland. She would take her kids there. And in fact, Riley remembers a couple of times, and she tells this story of sleeping in Elvis's bed with her mom and her brother when she was younger. She said, my mom loved being in her dad's bed. It made her feel close to him. And we felt it too. That closeness. I mean,
Yeah. It's super
I just,
special, I think. And then
I do.
Riley also says, you can still feel him in that room. His spirit is
Mm-hmm.
imprinted there. And I just like loved like reading that.
Yeah.
And like I said, it gave me more of an understanding of like, we all want to see
Mm-hmm.
it, of course, because it's
We
like
do.
elusive and hidden and,
You
we
always
want to
want
go
what you can't have.
upstairs. Right. But, for her to say like his spirit is imprinted
Mm-hmm.
there, I think anyone who's been to
Yeah.
Graceland can like attest that his spirit is imprinted in the house. So if she's, I can't even imagine how much it is like upstairs. And that
Yeah.
feels sort of like that should be kept for the family and not
I think so.
necessarily like, so much
Especially,
of their
we might,
lives was so public, and this
yes.
is something that they can have.
And I feel like, especially because it meant so much to Lisa Marie, it obviously means a whole lot to Riley and her siblings. And I definitely think at this point it should probably be kept that way.
Me too.
And all right. So moving on, we did a little bit of a chatty session. I know we're trying to keep
That's
this
okay.
brief and short. Um, so a couple of other things. So this, we're talking a little bit more about like the sanctuary upstairs. It was a very calming space for them. But Grayson was also a place where they did, I guess scary activities that could
Mhm.
threaten your life. I don't know. They would definitely give you an adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
So a couple of things that they did, they would go to amusement parks. In Memphis, they would go to Liberty Land, which is when Elvis wanted to go there, he'd have the whole place shut down. It was all to himself, Memphis Mafia, and whatever friends that they invited. And Lisa Marie says he and I would ride on the roller coasters. I loved it. In particular, the Zippin' Pinnin'. Am I saying that
Yeah.
right? Zippin' Pinnin'.
The Zip and Pippin. Yeah. She loved
Pippin.
that. Yeah, no, she loved that roller coaster, and
which was his favorite, I think.
it was his favorite too. So I wonder, it it was nice to see that like they had, this like lawlessness, this fun, this adrenaline rush, but then also the sanctuary of upstairs. It
I
was
did.
both sides of that relationship. Another adrenaline rush that Lisa talks about is a snowmobile ride one winter at Graceland. And she says that she was pretty scared. And then she says, I got on the snowmobile anyway because he was my dad. He started going down the steepest part of the driveway, lost control, and we started sliding and jumped the curb. We both stayed on somehow and landed on the grass laughing. I mean, it's dangerous, but she was like, that they were laughing about it. It's very sweet.
We always talk about people say, there are a lot of risky things that go on in Elvis's world, but it was Elvis, so I trusted him, and I always wonder if Lisa Marie had a little bit of that, like the combination, like it's my father, but he's also Elvis, so what could go wrong?
Right.
And so, but obviously they had a very close bond. They did a lot of things together. They had, the shared sanctuary space. They got into some trouble. So they were very close. And Lisa Marie says, I was super connected to him. Our closeness was a lot tighter than I have ever let on to anyone in the past. He loved me dearly and was totally devoted. That was one of my favorite quotes in the entire book. It was one of the first things that you read.
And I think that she says it's a lot tighter than she's let on, that it's like, we're so privileged to be able to read this book from her perspective. Like she and Riley didn't really owe us that, or owe anyone that. But, it was really a privilege to be able to read it and read her perspective of, she's the only person that Elvis was her father, So she's the only person who can give us that perspective, and to read about their closeness. We always read about Elvis and Gladys's closeness. But Lisa's saying, quote, he always had my back. It was just really nice to hear like that perspective, because no one else can have that perspective. And I don't know, something sweet. They had sweet nicknames. So Elvis's nicknames for Lisa were Yisa with a Y and Buttonhead. So he called her those two things, which, I feel like most parents have nicknames for their kids. So it was
very cute. But like going back a little bit, it just, for me, like she was 9 when he passed away. And so I always, 9 years, I feel like you're very young. I feel like you can't, as an adult, we're both adults now, and I feel like you can develop more of a relationship with your parents. So for them to have this close bond at such an early age for Lisa, I don't know, it just seems extraordinary to me. And it was something like I definitely, like you said, we're privileged to get to learn more about.
Absolutely. One of the coolest things to read about, this was like one of my favorite things, was Riley sort of says that her mother and Elvis must have had a similar force. In Riley's voice, she says, quote, everyone who ever met her experienced a force, passion, protection, loyalty, and a deep engagement with a spirit that was incredibly powerful. Whatever spiritual force my grandfather possessed undoubtedly ran through my mother's veins. When you were with her, you could feel it. I just love that. And I think if you listen to the audiobook or read the book, you get such a sense of who Lisa was and her strength of character. And it was like, she had a potty mouth. I love it.
Potty mouth. She didn't care. She'll say it.
I love it.
She's speaking her mind. But so talking about like the similarities, like, they shared this, like this force, this feeling, this, I guess, aura, spirit, you could call it. But one thing that was mentioned in the book that Riley also drew a comparison to was their moods. Yeah. So they, again, very strong presence, I think, either side of the coin. And Lisa Marie says about Elvis, I felt my father could change the weather. If he was in a shitty mood, it was shitty outside. If it was storming, it was because he was about to go off. I believed back then that he could make it storm.
And I loved, so then Riley later says that her mother was, quote, such a force that sometimes I really thought if she focused hard enough, real thunderbolts would appear. I love that. Like the whole lightning thing, first off, of the Elvis connection.
Like,
that's the
it's all coming together.
Yeah. But just that, you get a sense of who Lisa was after we read so much about Elvis and like who his intensity, and that Lisa really had that intensity too. I loved that comparison.
And again, just love that it's all coming full circle.
Yeah.
But so Lisa also goes on to talk more about Elvis's presence. So he talks a little bit, like if he was in a mood, like it. But she also said that she felt that Elvis was larger than life, that we already see him, as I feel like the onlookers, as fans, we see that, okay, he was like this icon. He is bigger than life. But Lisa Marie specifically said, he was a god to me, a chosen human being, which I feel like is just incredible. As I feel like usually I feel like you go, oh no, they're just my father. They're just a family member. But for her to have that perspective, even as his child, to say, no, he was this big thing. And even I noticed it.
And something that was interesting was that reading too, that like she never wanted to disappoint him. This was something which like her unique perspective as his only child, like that she can speak on. So although she says that like, she loved her father and she knew he loved her, she says that she always wanted his approval on everything. And also, this is just a little quote, I feared him too. He was intense. You didn't want him to get angry with you. If I ever upset him or if he was mad at me at all, I felt like everything was ending. I couldn't deal with that. It's sad, but I think it's like, when you don't want to disappoint the person, like your parent at all. And so she felt like, she didn't want to disappoint him because he was so big in her mind and, in the world at the time too. So.
But, and then she also goes on to say that, she wanted his approval on everything. So again, the show's like, I guess, he was, even he might not have been like the authority figure that we said in the beginning, he definitely was, I guess you could say almost like a standard. Right. Like he expected a lot, even though he didn't put the pressure on.
Yeah, I feel like she felt pressure, but I don't know that, like the way she describes it anyway, it seems like he didn't put it on her, but she still felt a pressure that like to not disappoint him. And then one of the saddest parts in the book for me anyway was reading about how much Lisa worried about her father. So this is from the second chapter, I believe, where she talks about him passing away. And she says, quote, I was always worried about my dad dying. Sometimes I'd see him and he was out of it. Sometimes I would find him passed out. I was sitting next to him in my room watching TV and I said, Daddy, please don't go anywhere. Please don't die. He said, I'm not going anywhere. Then he smiled at me. And then later she says, I knew that something tragic was coming, which made me feel protective, that I had to watch out for him. I just, like, when I read that, I felt
lost it.
So, I'm like even getting emotional reading it now. Like, that she just, that's so much for a kid to feel.
Like 9 years old. For me, like that's what I was always like, this is somebody who's 9 years old having these feelings, having to feel that you're needed to protect your father, your parent.
Yeah.
The person who's supposed to be doing that for you.
Right. And to me, it feels like it's showing like Elvis as not a perfect person, but not in a bad way, just in a realistic way of like, when she says like, I would find him passed out, like we know that he struggled with, some addictive tendencies towards the end of his life and prescription drugs and all kinds of things like that. And so it's kind of like humanizing in a way of, I know a lot of people are touched by addiction and, this story in general deals a lot with that topic, Lisa's story. And so it was, I don't know, it was humanizing to me to like that.
Definitely.
Elvis was not perfect. We know that. We know he wasn't, know. It's like not nice to read, but it's like, I feel like it made a deeper connection in a little bit of a way. I don't know. And it made me feel for Lisa too, so much.
Definitely. And now we end up getting to the sad day of, I know, we'll try not to leave it on
downer.
The sad note. I know. Moving on to the day of Elvis's passing. Again, they share this deep connection. On this day, Lisa Marie was 9, and she said that she woke up in a jolt in the early afternoon and she sensed a panic. She said, I thought something's not right. It felt like a different energy. And I feel like in the book, she goes on to explain, like, almost as if like his energy kind of left the house, if the energy, like the people around her created a new energy for the house, like Graceland.
Right.
And yeah, go ahead.
I mean, she just talks a lot about like feeling very angry about him passing away. She says that, she was screaming, quote, screaming bloody murder and was, trying to be pulled away from seeing his body. And later she says that extreme anger was my first response. The grief came later. I don't really know why, except that I was angry at the universe that this could happen. And then one of the most heartbreaking, I'm like getting emotional reading this.
I know.
One of the most heartbreaking lines of the book for me was, she said, quote, whenever I told my dad I was scared he was going to die, he'd say, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. But he did. And I'm like, I'm actually tearing up. Like, it's just so sad, that she felt, like we were saying, that she felt so worried about him, and that, it happened. I mean, it's like devastating.
Just the line, but he did, for me.
Yeah.
And just like kind of like realities set in. We promise we won't leave it on such a downer.
No, this is the worst part, I think.
It is. We promise. But after obviously losing a parent from a young age is going to be very difficult for anybody. But she talks a lot about the struggles that she had after his passing. She says, it'll hit me still. On and off it comes. There have been nights as an adult when I could just get drunk and listen to his music and sit there and cry. The grief still comes. It's still just there. And
this book is just like a beautiful and heartbreaking and touching portrait of grief in many different forms. The loss of a son, the loss of a brother, the loss of a father, and just loss, profound loss. And it's such a beautiful and heartbreaking portrait of grief and the difficulty of grief, and that it's still just there.
And go ahead.
I'm sad. So Riley also says about her mother struggling with Elvis's passing that, quote, I don't think she ever processed the loss. I certainly knew she was heartbroken my whole life. I remember when I was little feeling angry at Elvis for leaving my mother and for causing all this pain. Whenever I would hear Elvis's voice, I would feel my mother's anguish, feel the loss of him. Like that, like the connection between Lisa and Riley is so strong, and the connection between Lisa and her father was so strong, and Elvis and Gladys it's like this strength, this intensity of connection, this intensity of, I don't know, love and grief and all of these things.
And for me, it's just like, I always thought Riley always describes kind of the connection between Lisa and Elvis, and that she always recognized how strong it was. And I can only imagine that Riley, through their connection, that she also felt some kind of connection to Elvis, because I think she went to Graceland. She got to see it personally, how her mother reacted being there. She got to see firsthand the grief that her mother experienced over that. And I feel like in some way she was experiencing it alongside her, if that makes sense in any way. But little side note, but back on, Lisa Marie also said, after my father died, people always described me as sad. And that was like it was later in the book that this came.
Yeah.
And that was another one of the things, like, wow. Because I feel like if you do look at the younger pictures of her, and she just looks so bright, bubbly, and fun. And then she talks about, looking at pictures later, that it's almost like her light diminished and it was just no longer there. I think those are the light is, I think, the word she used.
Yeah. And I mean, Elvis obviously had a profound impact on Lisa's life. Being Elvis's daughter and his only child meant that Lisa was like in the spotlight from day one.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, she says that she was always proud of her father, but she couldn't help feel like some people used her for who he was. But just like her dad, she loved performing and touring. And she does say that she didn't like to perform Elvis songs.
Yeah.
Because she felt
why.
like, yeah, she wanted to have her own identity, quote, as much as she could have.
Yeah.
But
Elvis, she calls it a little cheesy too.
Yeah. Elvis and Graceland and Memphis offered or seemed to offer Lisa like a feeling of protection. And, you know, talking a little bit about going and like sleeping in his bed. So Riley says, when my mom lived in Nashville, she would often drive the 200 miles southwest to sleep at Graceland in her dad's bed. She was in the house, desperate to feel protected, desperate to connect with her father. She would lie in his bed, lie on his floor, anything to feel some comfort. It was the feeling of going to church when all is lost and saying, please, Jesus, help me. It's so sad.
I know.
And, you know, he remained such a huge presence in her life. And like, how could he not? He had this intensity of character and, you know, her children just felt that closeness that Lisa absolutely Elvis had for sure.
And so we talked a little bit about early childhood, talked a little bit about her and Elvis. Now we're going to move on to like, we kind of segment this in like years, I guess you could say, in different categories of her life. So we're going to talk a little bit about like the teenage years and adult years, which, you know, the years that followed Elvis's passing. And so after Elvis's passing, she was primarily living in LA, still always wanting to be at Graceland or school and just not at home. So she went to several different schools. One of the schools, John Thomas Dye School, which was in the hills of Bel Air. She also went to ritzy schools, as she called them, in LA, where everyone had a famous father and mother. She also went to a French school, which I find very interesting. It doesn't strike me that Lisa Marie would go to a French school, just based off her personality.
Right. And she said that, you know, she went to a couple different schools, but she says she had a self-proclaimed, quote, bad attitude. And she was, quote, always falling behind in her studies. And she says, quote, my mom couldn't control me. You couldn't torture me to want to learn. So I feel like a lot of this is like rebellion after the traumatic loss of her father, of course. But that she just didn't like school, really, and didn't really want to be there. But the next thing, now we have to really try to not get carried away.
We really do. I see it in the notes. I'm like, okay, we need to contain ourselves right now.
I know. So we're going to talk a little bit about the connection between Lisa Marie and Priscilla and Scientology. So Scientology came into Lisa and Priscilla's life in 1978. So just a year after Elvis had passed away. So Priscilla met John Travolta, who talked to her about Scientology, and Priscilla joined the organization. And Larry Geller says in his book, If I Can Dream, that the only religion Elvis was wholly against was Scientology. And people had tried to recruit Elvis into the organization at various points. And I saw this and it made me mad. John Travolta said that he believed Elvis would still be here if Elvis had Dianetics and Scientology. And I was just like, ugh. When I hear that.
So for anybody,
John Travolta.
Tessa and I, we went through a long, deep dive conversation, texting back and forth about all the Scientology stuff. So if you've not read up on Scientology, we suggest it. It's quite interesting. And especially it ties in with the whole Lisa Marie story. So definitely suggest it. You'll probably learn a little bit more. We won't like go deep dive into all the terminology that we're about to use. Right. So look into it and you'll, I guess, understand a little bit more about the terminology we use. But when they were in Scientology, Lisa Marie went to the Apple Scientology School, which was in Los Feliz. Correct on that? I'm not good at pronunciation.
Feliz, I think.
Yes. But she was always in the ethics office and she was often in trouble. Not very different from the other schools.
No. So even though she was in this school that was, Scientology like approved,
Hmm.
she was still pretty naughty. And in the early 90s, Priscilla and Lisa were both like the big public faces for
Hmm.
Scientology. And there are a lot of like
Yeah.
ads that have their faces on them being like, I love the Celebrity Center. It's the best. And the Celebrity Center is like this big building in LA that like
Or
is the Scientology
celebrities.
headquarters where Scientology
Hmm.
celebrities go.
Yep.
Um, and I was reading a little bit because I was going down my deep dive,
Yep.
a little bit more about Lisa and Scientology. So this former high-level
Hmm.
Scientologist whose name Karen de la Catiguiere worked with Lisa when she was in obedience therapy. And in a Daily Mail article, she says, that the Daily Mail article says, quote, she claims Lisa Marie was made to do the purification rundown, which consists of hours in a hot sauna, doing large amounts of exercise and taking high levels of vitamins to make the body supposedly pure at least 3 times. The first of these was when she was just 12 years old. I mean, that's just like a
Crazy.
lot.
I know.
Crazy.
Crazy. But so while she was in Scientology, like, yeah, she went to a Scientology school, but she actually also lived at the Celebrity Center in LA, which was supposed to be for her own good. So while she was there, it was kind of for like detox purposes. I know Scientology does like their own kind of detox program. But Lisa Marie says that the first morning, this is her quote, first morning, I removed the large mirror from the wall, called my Coke dealer, and had a 4-day bender.
So even though she was in the Celebrity Center, nothing could really
Yeah.
like the school's supposed to help her get
Hmm.
over because they're very anti-drug,
Yeah.
and help her get over her substance abuse issues, but she kind of found a way around the rules, which seemed like she was doing at home. She did at school.
Yeah.
She did at the Celebrity Center. Like she could not really. She is very like talks about herself as like I couldn't be controlled, and she's very candid
Oh,
about
yeah.
it, which
She
I
always talks,
appreciated.
I think it was kind of the parallel. It's like nobody really ever told Elvis no. So who's really going to
Right.
tell me no?
Yep. And
Mm-hmm.
talking about the anti-drug stuff with Scientology. So Lisa was pretty active in Scientology for a while. For I think it was something like 35 years she was in Scientology. And
Yeah.
she's called a second generation Scientologist because she was not raised in the religion, but her
Hmm.
mother, and she was in their organization because her mother was. So she led various different causes, like literacy, advocating for children's literacy, but she also went to DC and testified against the overprescription of drugs to treat ADHD in children. And it's interesting because Riley touches on it a little bit later and says, like, there was a point where she wouldn't take like even Advil, but then later, even though she'd advocated against like antidepressants and stuff, she ended up
Yeah.
taking them once she'd left Scientology, which she left in about 2013, apparently because she had
Apparently.
drama with David Miscavige, who
Which,
is the head of the
yeah.
leader of the organization. So,
So you
okay,
don't do that in
Scientology
Scientology.
chapter complete.
We did it. Okay, moving on. Now that we did that, we contained ourselves. A lot that Lisa Marie also talks about during, the teenage, young adult years is she said that while she was only about 12 or 13, so kind of like when they got into Scientology a lot more, she said that she actually began to experiment with drugs and says, I wasn't addicted to one particular substance, and says her early years, when she used it, it was more of rebellion.
Mm-hmm. But later on, Lisa did struggle with addiction. So she says those early teenage years, she wasn't really addicted. It was more just, like she said, rebellion.
Rebellion.
But she struggled with alcohol use. Like she'd said, she would get drunk and
Mm-hmm.
listen to Elvis's music and be sad. And then after the birth of her twin daughters, Harper and Finley, in 2008, she was prescribed opioids after her C-section, which she became addicted to. And then that escalated to other substances.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to write a little bit about what she said
Yeah.
about her own, addiction. I think no one else can really, maybe Riley and, the people around her,
Mm-hmm.
how it affected them. But so she says, you have to have something bigger than that feeling of being high. If you don't, you're in trouble. And one of the most shocking parts about the addiction is that she
Yeah.
says, quote, it escalated to 80 pills a day. For a couple years, it was recreational, and then it wasn't. It was an absolute matter of addiction. Um, so obviously this is pretty difficult. Like Riley seems to talk about it being difficult for her family members, including Riley and Ben, to deal with. But she did eventually, after, she had this early experimentation, and then she didn't really do anything for a long time. And then it became addictive rather than, experimentation and rebellion like it was in her early teen years.
Yep.
But when she passed away, she was not really struggling with those substance abuse issues as much as she had been. So,
yep. And so now kind of turning a little bit of a page, and then we're getting into Lisa Marie's like adulthood. We're going to talk a little bit about her relationships, trying to keep everything a little bit as brief as possible. But one of the first things we kind of like learned about her as being, the only child of the King of Rock and Roll, she said that, she'd have numerous marriages. She was married 4 times, but she says, the Princess of Rock and Roll, there was a lot, being the Princess of Rock and Roll, there was a lot of pressure put upon her to marry, have children, and all of her relationships were made public.
Yeah. So one of her very first boyfriends was much older than her, like 10 years older than her, and he greatly betrayed her trust. And this kind of laid a groundwork for the foundation for like distrust in relationships. And so she talks about an incident where he took her to a park, and he had paid and had gotten someone to take pictures of them and leak them to the press and sell the story. And Riley says of her mom telling her that story that, quote, the first time my mom told me about this betrayal, she said it was her first memory of feeling used. The first time she realized people had an agenda with her. It was a core trauma for her, just one of a series of events from her childhood that came together to build a foundation of distrust in people. So she was really affected by things from very early on. She was 13 when this happened, I think 13 or 14.
And I feel like once that kind of happens, that you put up that wall a little bit with others, moving forward with different relationships. And even when she met Danny Keough, who is the father of Riley and Ben, even then she still kind of had that wall up. But when they first met, Danny saw Lisa Marie for the first time in a parking lot at the Celebrity Center, so the Scientology Celebrity Center, which I always wondered why he was there. I don't know if they
he was a Scientologist.
He was a Scientologist. Okay, that's what I figured. Because why else would you be in the Celebrity Center parking lot?
Yeah, I think I looked it up. I can't remember if it says he still is or he's not, but he was at least affiliated at that point.
Yeah, it was really interesting to hear Riley's perspective on the relationship, because obviously it's her mother and her father. And so Riley writes that when her dad saw her mom, this is a quote, he thought that this little creature at the end of the table had such power and presence, and it was nothing to do with being the child of Elvis Presley. And I just find that, I guess it was almost refreshing even for me. Like, I wasn't involved, but for me, it was like refreshing that for her, she got to be known as Lisa Marie and not just the daughter of Elvis Presley.
Right. Yeah. And so they were on and off. Danny and Lisa were on and off for a little bit at the beginning, but they eventually got married in October 1988 when Lisa was 20 and she was pregnant with Riley. So Riley's government name is Danielle Riley Keough, but everyone just calls her Riley. And then they had their second child together in 1992, Benjamin Storm Presley Keough. And Danny was a musician, and he helped to encourage Lisa to get a music career started and helped to record songs in her garage in Clearwater, Florida. They did not stay married. And Lisa has a funny little thing she says about this. She says, were Danny and I going to stay married forever? No way. But we were a different kind of soulmates and always ended up living in the same house somehow. So even after they got divorced in 1994. And it was interesting that we always hear that Priscilla and Elvis maintained a good relationship for Lisa. And it was interesting that, Lisa was able to do that with Danny for their kids too.
Oh yeah. To the point, it always seems like if you're reading the book after they met, they're always together. Like Lisa Marie could be, where was it? He was involved in the wedding. I believe it was.
Yes, he married, I think, Lisa and Michael Lockwood.
Yes.
Or he was in that wedding.
I think he was in the wedding, but I just like things like that. It's like he would go on vacation with them, even when like the new boyfriend or husband was there.
Yeah.
They were all in the same house. I don't know. It just seems special, like a special bond for them.
Right. Like she says that different kind of soulmates.
Yeah. But
Okay, next one. The next one is the crazy one. So she was married to Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson, the king of pop.
Yeah. So this was really different from her marriage to Danny.
Oh, yeah.
So Riley kind of says that her parents were both allergic. This is a quote, allergic to fame. But then Lisa ended up marrying like the most famous person at the time. Yeah.
But they still seemed, well, backtrack. When they got married, it was, which I didn't know all the details of when they got together, that she was kind of seeing Michael when she was still married to Danny. But then, later, these are all spoilers, by the way. Eventually her and Danny broke off. She married Michael Jackson. And then throughout their marriage, Michael Jackson always wanted to have children with Lisa Marie, but Lisa Marie kind of backed away from that and was nothing she ever felt comfortable with. She didn't have that same emotional connection or urge to have children with him like she did with Danny.
Because she said she knew she wanted kids with Danny, but then like with Michael Jackson, it didn't feel right. But so Lisa and Michael, obviously, when they got married, this was like huge news, paparazzi everywhere. They got married in secret in 1994, in May 1994, only 20 days after her divorce from Danny was finalized. And Lisa said that she had, quote, never been that happy again. So she seemed to look back like, with a good perspective on it. Yeah, like the beginning anyway.
The beginning.
Yeah. And Riley, it's so funny, this story, like the only person. I love
this story.
Yeah, Riley says, quote, at home, they were a regular married couple. They would drive us to school together in the morning, just like a normal family. Though sometimes Michael would bring a chimpanzee. It's like I can't even imagine. It's just so weird.
So one of the things that Lisa Marie does talk about is almost like a bit of a parallel between Michael Jackson and her father. And I don't know, when you mentioned the chimpanzee, all I could think was like, okay, Elvis had a chimpanzee, Elvis had one, Scatter. They kind of, there are definitely the parallels here. And even to the point, Elvis had Graceland, but Michael Jackson had Neverland. And Lisa Marie, Riley, and Ben, they would spend time at Neverland, but they would also just primarily spend their time with Michael at their house in Hidden Hills.
But they also went to Graceland several times. So Michael and Lisa. And if you look closely on one of the trees in the yard, you can see M+L in a heart carved into one of the trees. And Michael Jackson apparently did that. So,
and this tree is like kind of outside the meditation garden. So it's definitely, it's accessible to tourists.
Yeah. And there was always paparazzi following them, of course. I mean, she was so famous and he was so famous. But in the end, after a year or so, their marriage began to decline. Like Megan said, Michael really wanted Lisa Marie to have his children, and Lisa Marie never felt like it was right. And so that kind of caused a little bit of a rift between them. And then additionally, Michael Jackson was abusing substances, mostly prescription drugs. And, Lisa confronted him, but he kicked her out and he filed for divorce. It's just like a really crazy roller coaster relationship.
I was just getting ready to say that.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there was some contact, I think, even after the divorce.
Yeah, they were on and off for a while.
Yeah. And then, but eventually in 2009, Michael Jackson died while Lisa Marie was in London writing a record. And she always said, like, one conversation she talks about having with Michael Jackson in the book is that Michael Jackson's always afraid that he was going to die in the same way that her father did.
Yeah. Which, knowing like the prescription drugs and everything, it's pretty interesting that if anyone was going to be as famous as Elvis, like any sort of comparison, it would have to be Michael Jackson at that time. Yeah. He was as famous as Elvis was. So. Our next marriage is also a weird one. Okay. So Lisa was married to Nicolas Cage, the actor. So they met in October 2000. Lisa was engaged to a musician, and Nicolas Cage was married to Patricia Arquette. They were still legally married.
And they didn't go
as a couple. Yep. But then they got married so quick.
They went public in September of 2001, and then they got married August 2002. So less than a year by a month.
Yeah. And Riley kind of says that the relationship was short-lived, and then she says, quote, "It felt like something that came and left, like a Florida storm. I don't know if they were truly in love, although she said they were."
And then she also talks about an engagement ring incident, saying that her mom and Nick, they called him Nick, got into a fight, and her $65,000 engagement ring somehow ended up in the ocean. She claimed that she didn't throw it, but that it was thrown indeed.
Yeah. And only 108 days after their wedding,
didn't last
the pair broke up. One of the craziest things about this, I've been waiting for this one.
Is I know you have.
Nicolas Cage got to go upstairs at Graceland. And I was trying to do a little deep dive on this. So in a movie, Nicolas Cage plays someone, it's called like Wild at Heart, I think, who is obsessed with Elvis. And there's been a lot of things around like, oh, he was obsessed with Elvis. He was obsessed with Elvis. That's why he married Lisa. And he's like, no. But then I also found an article where he's quoted as saying that Elvis was one of his, quote, heroes. So,
which is it?
But he got to go upstairs at Graceland. So, just saying.
She was waiting for that one. She needed to dish out all the information on that one.
I need to research more on that because I want to know the full tea.
We do. But in the end, although at first Lisa Marie said that her relationship was a nightmare with him, and that they shouldn't have been married in the first place, they later managed to be civil though. Which I like to point out that most of the book, so if you have like the physical copy, there's the one text where it's supposed to be Lisa Marie's words, and then the other text where it's supposed to be Riley's words. I would say most of the time about the marriage to Nicolas Cage is not from Lisa Marie. It's actually coming from Riley. So I'm just saying that Lisa Marie did not, in the recordings that Riley had, did not explicitly talk about this period of time a whole lot.
Yeah.
It was mostly Riley filling in the gaps. Yeah, it's really interesting to have that, the physical copy and get to see, okay, what did Lisa Marie really elaborate on, really want to talk about? And then what part of it was Riley like, okay, we need to fill in the gaps here a little bit.
Right. So Lisa's final marriage was to Michael Lockwood, who was the musical director for her album Now What? And they got married in Kyoto, Japan in January 2006. And he is the father of her twin daughters, Harper and Finley, who she had in October 2008.
Yeah, and initially, as their family, so at the time, Riley was 19, Ben was, not doing the math, younger.
3 years younger.
16. 3 years younger, so 16. So they're all living in LA at the time, but eventually Lisa Marie decides that she kind of wants a little bit more of a quaint life, and they moved to the UK.
Also because the headquarters for Scientology are not far from where she moved. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, got to throw that one in there. Now that we're doing that, they also lived in Clearwater. I didn't mention it. I was trying to stay on topic here. They lived in Clearwater. Clearwater is like the mecca of Scientology as well. Yeah. Just pointing that one out. But eventually, after moving to the UK, they did move back into Nashville. And during this time, after we talked about this a little bit prior, when we're talking about like the abuse that she had before, during this time is when Lisa Marie started to suffers substance abuse issues.
And like you said before, it was mostly like prescription drugs. And then later there were some other substances too, and drinking. And she suffered with this for a decent amount of her relationship with Michael Lockwood, after her daughters were born, the twins. Lisa and Michael separated in 2016, but their divorce wasn't finalized for another 5 years. And it was pretty tumultuous. It was kind of a drama-laden custody battle type thing. But, he is the father of 2 of her children. And so she really doesn't say anything very negative about him at all in the book.
So yeah, we're not going to go there for the podcast for today. But so we talked about the 4 husbands that she had. So Danny, Michael Jackson, Nicolas Cage, and then Michael Lockwood. Throughout all this and, all through her love life, even though it can be tumultuous and there was always things in the headlines, Lisa Marie always put her kids first. And I think that's one of the things that I learned the most about her through this. And Riley says flat out that she put her children before her partners. And she always wanted to hear what her children had to say about the boyfriends, and always says that, if they didn't like them, they were getting kicked out. But Riley said anytime she got a new partner, she'd bring us into the kitchen and say, guys, this is insert name. And she'd smile and watch. She always wanted to see our read on the new boyfriend. She trusted our instincts. If he said one wrong thing to us, she would put him in his place. And I appreciate that.
So kind of off that, we're going to talk a little bit about Lisa's 4 children. So Lisa said, quote, I fell in love with being a mom. I realized I had been called to care for something else. Being a mom was everything to me. And the first of her 4 children was Riley Keough, who co-authored this memoir. And she's the eldest of Lisa's children. She is an actress, best known for her work in particularly Daisy Jones and the Six, and also a newer show called Under the Bridge. And her first big movie was Mad Max Fury Road. So Lisa talks a little bit about when Riley was born. She says, quote, everybody was happy. She was such a special beacon, a unique spirit, a light in this universe. I think I was a vessel serving another purpose, and Riley was mine. So they had a super close relationship.
Oh yeah, they did.
We can tell by the book.
And Riley says about her mother, my mother told me everything about her life. And that's definitely evident through the entire book. I highly suggest you either listen to it, read it. Her mother told her everything. They were very close. She told her all the personal details.
And Riley's like, as her daughter, that was kind of a lot. But when I went to write the book, I was like, thanks for telling me everything so I can, tell your story authentically.
Exactly. Riley, though, she did in August of 2022, she had her first child. So that made Lisa Marie a grandmother. And when her daughter was born, she said, my mom instantly became obsessed with Tupelo. She said, my mom would call Tupelo our little light, kind of just how Riley was. And she said, my mother wouldn't let anyone else hold the baby.
Right.
I know, which... Sorry, go ahead.
It's just one of my favorite things is hearing that perspective too. I feel like Lisa Marie didn't get to be a grandmother for very long. She passed away not too long after Tupelo was born, less than a year, 6 months or so. And it's just to know that they had a super close relationship and that Lisa loved being a grandmother almost as much as she loved being a mother is really sweet. And this was one of my favorite things from the book. I feel like I've said that so many times because I just love this.
I know. Everything's good.
But Riley talks a little bit about using silly made up baby language with her baby and says, quote, I realized in that moment that all of these phrases I use and the things I say to my daughter are the ways my mom spoke to me. She had gotten them directly from her dad from the South, and all of them are alive in me. She mothers my daughter through me. like that
That's so
closeness
sweet.
and also that perspective of like,
Mm.
her mom isn't here, but she's still here in a way.
Yeah, almost it started, I feel like almost you could say with Gladys. Gladys
Mhm.
and Elvis, I feel like had that kind of special language. Elvis and Lisa had that special language. And then
Yeah.
obviously we see the closeness between Lisa and Riley. And then I think Riley has now carried it on to her daughter, Tupelo.
Hmm.
And just a little bit of added information, Riley is the owner and sole trustee of the Graceland estate. So it is also being kept within the family.
Yeah. And she also has this sweater.
She
So
does. It was very
that's
fitting
why
then that
I
we
saw
wore
the
it.
picture of her and I was like, I want
Oh,
it.
okay.
That was why when I went, I was like, I know I
Mm-hmm.
want that sweater.
Yep.
So next, another sad part, of
No.
course. Her life was just so heartbreaking. That was the hardest part about this book is like all of the heartache
Mm-hmm.
she went through.
Yeah.
So her Lisa Marie's second child, Benjamin Storm Presley Keogh, was born on October 21st, 1992. They were very close. Lisa
Mm-hmm.
said, quote, he'd tell me everything. Ben and I had the same relationship that my father and his mother had. And Riley says that her brother had, quote, given himself the responsibility of never leaving their mother's side. So that's just like they had this closeness, and this is what makes his story so particularly like heart-wrenching, I think, is that
Mm-hmm.
Lisa and Riley were obviously close, but even Riley is like, they were closer, and it's like I can't even imagine that
That's
closeness. It's
special bond. You can only imagine a lot of it had to do with the qualities that she said that her son Benjamin shared with Elvis. And she said Ben was very similar to his grandfather, very, very, very. And in every way, he even looked like him. Ben was so much like him, it scared me. I didn't want to tell him because I thought it was too much to put on a kid.
I mean, and when
Just
you look
adds
at
to it.
pictures,
Oh my goodness, yes.
the family resemblance is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But we learned a little bit about Ben's character.
Yeah.
I feel like the sense I got anyway from what Riley tells of her brother is that he was a little bit of a lost soul. Like he struggled to find
Mm-hmm.
his place and what he
Mm-hmm.
was good at. But some of his favorite places were Japan and Hawaii. And he loved nature and being in nature. And Riley says that her brother was a little bit annoying because, quote, when he learned to do something, he actually
Mm-hmm.
would be good at it.
Yeah.
And he was apparently, quote, good at everything. But he did struggle to find a sense of purpose. And
Which
later
also
in his life, no, go
it
ahead.
kind of reminded me of like you were talking about the teen years of Lisa Marie when she's talking about those years. She kind of said like she kind of struggled with finding a purpose. Like she didn't really want to learn anything. She didn't know what she was going to do with it. She didn't know really what she wanted to do after school, what purpose she was going to hold in life. Yeah. And it kind of just reminded me of that same storyline.
Yeah. And so Ben struggled, similarly to his mother. He struggled with alcohol and substance abuse, as well as mental health struggles. And in July of 2020, Ben tragically died by suicide. He was only like 26.
I believe so.
Or no, 28, 92. Yeah, 28. And Riley talks about her brother, and this is like this was the hardest chapter for me to read. All this stuff is hard, but I feel like we're used to reading about that story, and this was just there's no one can talk about it. I've never read about Ben's story to this extent, and so
hearing it directly from Riley and Lisa Marie, who were in the moment there, instead of just kind of an onlooker.
Right. And so Riley says, quote, that after Ben passed away, quote, he was such an angel that to everyone it felt wrong that he had died, like a mistake had been made. Even people who spent a short amount of time with him knew he was a force for good. You could sense it emanating off of him. And after he passed away, Lisa really felt like an intense need to honor her son. And this is part of the reason I think, that I got to anyway, that she wanted to share her story and her experience. She said, quote, if I'm honoring my Ben, and if I'm helping other people by sharing the experience I had with him with addiction or suicide, that feels really authentic to me.
Um, and those last couple of chapters were just heartbreaking. And you really could see the love that Lisa Marie had for her son. It wasn't, I feel like, just like, it was almost a spiritual bond, I feel like, in a way. They shared
Absolutely.
so much of the same spirit. And Riley says about the relationship, I had an instinct that Ben was the love of my mom's life. Almost as I feel like kindred spirits, like I said.
Yeah.
They were meant for each other. They shared some of the same struggles. They kind of walked the same path.
Yeah. And
Seeing so much.
Even Lisa says, quote, like something that she thinks she thought Ben was more genetically her than Dan.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know.
I believe it.
That closeness. And to look at it from, I just can't imagine losing your son that way, especially when you're that close. And
yeah,
I mean, that chapter, like when I was reading it, I was like open mouth weeping in the library on the day it came out because I just, it hit me much more than I thought it would.
Yeah. And I try to, when I'm reading these things, I try to put myself in the place of like, almost like I'm living with them. Right. And like Riley was talking about, everybody was living under the same roof.
Right.
So I guess it's not, even though he was an adult, and most times adults are like living on their own, but you're seeing this person every single day. And for all of us,
it's kind of like, Elvis had all his whole family around him too in the same house. It's like that.
You see him every single day. And just for all of a sudden them not to be there, especially they're talking about during COVID. So everybody was kind of locked down in the house together. And then just all of a sudden they're just not there. For me, I feel like that was the most heartbreaking.
Right. And then
we're trying to be more positive here now.
No. Lisa's final two children are the twins, Harper, Vivian Ann, and Finley Aaron Love. So Vivian Ann, those are like Priscilla from Priscilla's side of the family. Yep. And then Aaron is Elvis's middle name, and Love was Gladys's middle name. I just like the detail of those names.
I do too.
And, so she had the children via, she had IVF, and she had the twins in 2008. And I just feel like Lisa had such a strong bond with all her kids.
Oh, I know.
Harper and Finley, we learned the least about, I think, just because I think they just turned 16. So they're still minors, and she did a really good job of protecting them, I think.
I agree.
Riley is doing a good job of that too.
But they were talking about the strong bond that Lisa Marie would have with her children. Riley said, my mom could strongly sense in a deeply spiritual way who these two beings inside her were. She felt that Harper would be delicate and feminine and strong. Finley, sassy and stubborn and sweet. And she was right. That's who they are. I find that one interesting too.
Right. And so Riley was 19 when the twins were born. And so she helped raise her younger sisters, and alongside her mother and her brother, her sisters and her father lived at her house for a while. So like we said, the whole family under one roof again. And the twins were raised in England. And
Tessa knows a little bit about that.
Being raised in England, yes. And, they would go to the chip shop and to the pub. And Riley says in particular, her mom loved gardening with the sisters. But Lisa was struggling with addiction when Harper and Finley were young. But I feel like she really always tried to be the best mom she could be. And that was what was like heartbreaking about her struggling with addiction, was that she felt like, I think Riley says, like, she felt like she wasn't a good mom anymore. And that was like something she had always felt proud of. And so that is like this whole, but it's just so hard to read and to like know how much she struggled with that.
Absolutely. Especially when she talks about like, this is what I was really put on earth to do, is to be a mother, to, care for these children, raise them. Because she said that she loved being a mother, and the closeness between her kids was just, and the closest we see that is very evident.
Yeah. And, obviously like Riley finishing this book for her mom.
Oh, yeah.
There had to be like crazy amount of closeness there. It's like, it made me really kind of in awe of her that Riley, that she was able to write this beautifully profound memoir and like honor her mother and her brother and just all of it. It's like, I admire her so much for being able to do that. She definitely makes me feel, anyway, you probably feel the same. Like the Presley legacy is in good hands. Like
it is in good hands.
I think she has a good head on her shoulders and strength of character. And
I think the closeness that she had with her mother, I think is really going to help along the way.
Absolutely. So now we just want to talk a little bit about Lisa and her music. I feel like this is not something that people talk about very often. And obviously I'm a music person. And so I wanted us to highlight some of, going off of the topic of highlighting Lisa's words. I wanted us to highlight some of her lyrics and what she had to say about certain topics. She first got into music, of course, because of her father. And she said that he, quote, always wanted me to sing. I didn't love it, but I knew it made him happy, so I did it. And she said she had piano lessons and he would always want to be like the phone to be put up to the piano so he could hear her playing and she'd be like, oh, okay, fun. And it wasn't until she got a little bit older that she actually took an interest in taking singing lessons and pursuing music seriously.
Yeah, and I feel like it wasn't really till she met Danny, correct me if I'm wrong, that she really started getting into it because that was also his passion, was music.
Yeah.
But even though like she would receive positive feedback from other people, like we said that her husband Danny at the time was helping with this. She did have 3 full-length albums, To Whom It May Concern, which was released in 2003. Now What, which was released in 2005, and Storm and Grace, which was actually named after her son, was released in 2012.
And just like her dad, I think we said it before, this was kind of an impact of his presence on her life. She loved touring and she loved performing. She said, quote, I loved performing live. I could watch people's faces and see how my words or my music affected them. I could always see it in their faces. And then getting to meet the fans and having them tell me what my music had done for them, that was really something. It's just so Elvis of her.
It is, because he always talks about, like, I want to get back on stage. I want to see my fans.
And how he never turned down an autograph and never, turned down a photo. And it's like, she seemed to love that too.
Agreed. But also, like we talked about, she is the daughter of the king of rock and roll. So getting into music, no pressure, right?
Oh my God.
But there obviously was a lot of pressure being the daughter of Elvis Presley. Riley talks a lot about her mom being apprehensive about music and singing. She recalls a lot of times like her mom just being in the car and they would just be singing. She said, my mom would have the music blaring in her black Mercedes. My mom would always sing along in the car, but in a self-conscious way, as though she didn't want anyone to hear her. I didn't understand back then why she was scared of music.
Yeah. And Lisa talks about like how she felt like crowds always wanted her to perform Elvis songs. And then Riley says something about, this was something that stuck with me too, was like that she always didn't like when people were like Elvis impersonators in the crowd. And how, she would have to check and like mentally prepare herself to see, like, I think Riley says, like, imagine like having to go out and perform and seeing someone dressed up as your dead father. Like,
exactly. That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that is weird. So, I can't imagine like being Elvis's daughter and having a music career. And, Riley says too, that the record company kept trying to make her sound a little more country, to target Elvis fans and, tap into that audience, but that didn't always feel authentic to Lisa.
No.
And
especially when you're trying to
know she was authentic.
We know. Especially when she's kind of like talking a lot about trying to pave like her own path, like be her own person. And when you're trying to, put a damper on that, I guess you could say it's not authentic to who she was.
Yeah.
But she was, yes. Me? You?
I don't mind. She released a lot of music, but she didn't do really any Elvis covers apart from for some special occasions. She, for anniversaries and stuff like that. And she released sort of singles and one-off tracks that had layers, layered her voice with previous recordings of her father.
And one of those that she duetted was Where No One Stands Alone. And this was done in 2018, which is obviously where we get the title of this book from. So one of the lyrics is Hold my hand all the way, every hour, every day, from here to the great unknown. I'm not going to sing it. And that's Tessa's job.
The duet is really beautiful too.
It is.
And it does, especially with this title of the book, and it has a deeper meaning now, I think.
Yep.
And although Lisa did find it a little bit hard, being Elvis's daughter and trying to have her own identity, she did very graciously, she said that she enjoyed interacting with both her fans and her dad's fans. And music seemed to be an escape for her.
Oh, yeah.
She had this, was born into musical royalty, married music royalty, crazy. I
mean, both, except for Nicolas Cage, all of her husbands were musicians.
And she just says music was an escape for her. She's like, quote, I was falling behind in every subject, but I would lock myself in my room and listen to my records. Music, always, always, always. And then, like you said before, the apprehension. But
even for her, it was kind of like a safe space, I guess you could say, music. She didn't really encourage it with her children, almost in a way she discouraged it. And Riley said, my mom had a complicated relationship with music and singing, and it wasn't encouraged in our house. So I believe Riley wanted to take singing lessons or something. And she's like, brush it away. No.
She was like, you don't need to take singing lessons.
You don't need it. That's okay.
Which then we know Riley, sang for Daisy Jones and the Six. And my favorite little tidbit is the guitar strap. Is that what you're going to say?
No, I was going to say she also recently sang Chanel
at the Chanel show.
Yeah.
The guitar strap that she uses in Daisy Jones and the Six is the same as the guitar strap Elvis used in the 68 Comeback Special.
I believe she didn't realize that at the time. I don't think they made her aware of it until after.
There's a little detail. I love that.
I do too.
And Riley talks about how it was, difficult for her mom to have this career in music. She says, quote, she was a beautiful lyricist, but she didn't feel like she had real control over her music. I thought it was so brave for her to make a record at all.
Yeah. And so one thing that Tessa's major, she's into music. I am not musically gifted. So Tessa really wanted to highlight a lot of the lyrics that Lisa Marie wrote and kind of how they express certain things that she was going through, expressing certain people, just feelings at the time that she was having. Scientology was one of them. So I will let Tessa explain a little bit more about these lyrics.
Yeah, so she covers several different topics in her lyrics. The very first one that I wanted to highlight was her relationship with Elvis and just in general to Memphis. So her one song, Lights Out, she sings about, quote, keeping her watch 2 hours behind. So it was always on Memphis time. And then this is one of the lyrics. Someone turned the lights out there in Memphis. That's where my family's buried and gone. Last time I was there, I noticed a space left next to them there in Memphis in the damn back lawn. There's chills.
Very eerie in a way, but
very eerie. And then another one where she talks about Elvis is called Nobody Noticed It. And to Rolling Stone in 2003, she says that she wrote this song about after she was flicking through TV channels and she saw a TV program called The Last Days of Elvis. And she was angry at the people who had been close to her dad for, using his name and talking about the end of his life and the later years. And she kind of expressed that in the song where she says, her dad, and this is the lyric, didn't have anyone to keep him leveled off. He wasn't the only one. I think he was one of the very first ones to go through. Oh, this isn't the lyric. I'm sorry. This is what she said. She said he didn't have, I'm like, this is not very lyrical. So she says her dad didn't have anyone to keep him leveled off. He was the only one. He wasn't the only one, but I think he was one of the very first to go through it. It was very lonely there where he was. I know that. And these are the lyrics from Nobody Noticed It. She says, I wish I had spent just a little more time with you. And then the chorus is, you're still lovely. You were lovely then. All that you had to endure. I guess nobody noticed it. So sad.
And so it wasn't just Elvis that she wrote songs about, or just that feeling.
So she talked a little bit about addiction too. And so Riley talks in the book about her mom's song, High Enough. And Riley says, quote, she wasn't doing drugs at the time, but she was drinking, some nights way too much. And the song is very clearly about addiction. But this was way before any of us could have conceived that it would become such a big problem for her. And the lyrics read, can you bring me another? I'm not there yet. Do I seem to remember? How much till I forget? No, I'm not doing fine. I'm drowning in my mind again. And like, when I was going through these lyrics, I was like, it's so sad.
It is.
And I think it was from like an early album. So it was before she like really struggled with substance abuse. So it was just interesting that it was a topic so early on.
Yeah. But so we mentioned one of the albums is Storm and Grace, which was named after, well, it's one of the songs, but it was named after her son, Ben. And so a lot of her songs that she will address her children in them.
So Storm and Grace, Benjamin's middle name, was Storm. And some people have interpreted the song as being about Elvis too. But I think because of the Storm part that it's about Ben, I think that's mostly what we've heard. So some of the lyrics are, you are the most beautiful man that I've ever known. You blow me away, your storm and your grace. And then there's another song. She talks about her kids, and Riley mentions this in the book. And this one is called So Lovely. And Riley says that her and Ben sing in the background. And the lyrics are Lisa saying, you know, I did something right, something that keeps me alive. And oh, you sweet little babies, when you came, you let me know I was finally happy. I know.
That's so sweet. And you can tell like she was meant to be a mom.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to highlight like these lyrics. Like this is what she had to say like creatively about these huge topics in her life.
Yeah. And I think before the memoir, I think this was kind of her outlet, using lyrics to kind of express her opinions and things that she was going through. She also wrote a song that Riley mentions about her mom. The song was just Raven, right? Yep.
And so at times, Lisa and Priscilla had a complicated and strained relationship. But in the song Raven, I just thought that this was like the best way to kind of sum up the relationship, was talking about these lyrics. So she sings, I'll hear your stories that fill your sad eyes when you had Raven hair, go on, dry your eyes. And apparently Priscilla like loved hearing that song. And like always got excited on tour to hear it.
And then, we're back. We're making a full loop again. She also wrote songs kind of referring to Scientology.
So we had both when she was in Scientology and when she left it. So like we said before, she advocated against the use of psychiatric medicine in children. And so the song To Whom It May Concern has lyrics that are very like in line with Scientology's beliefs. So this is some of the lyrics are, if you can't stop the symptoms, then why in the hell do you drug the children? There's a doctor on every campus now, and he's going to tell you what you're feeling. And it's very like pro Scientology.
Oh, yeah.
So interestingly, on the album Storm and Grace, she releases a song called You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, which is very like sassy and bitter, and I feel like Lisa, like very Lisa. And it's apparently about her leaving Scientology and her feud with David Miscavige. And one of the things that clued people into it being about this was her using terminology that is specifically used in Scientology. So she says in the song, I'm a bit transgressive and suppressive as well, which they use the words transgression and suppression, like in the mental stuff, whatever. She says, you ain't seen nothing yet. Am I a disruption to your corruption? Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. And I just like that. It's like sassy Lisa. And
it is. It's sassy.
It's interesting, growing up as a Scientologist, how this must have affected her mind, and also how when she left, how that would have had a profound effect on her.
Definitely, because Scientology, compared to what most people think, is not the same app. I think that's all we're going to say. We close the Scientology discussion again. But kind of now we're approaching the end of our notes. It was a very lengthy episode, but like it was kind of wrapping things up. So throughout Lisa Marie's book, we learn a lot about different tragedies, different struggles that she faced throughout her lifetime. The first thing we're going to talk about is Elvis's passing when she was 9. That was one of the first tragedies that she ever really dealt with. She also had a string of complicated relationships throughout her life, talking about kind of that first boyfriend that she had that was much older than her, and the 4 marriages that she had. And then ultimately the biggest tragedy that occurred in her life was when her son passed away in July of 2020. And about this, Riley says, despite all this love she still had inside of her, and all of her efforts to live, we all knew my mom was going to die of a broken heart. Which is very sad.
So sad. So Lisa did pass away on January 13th, 2023, and she was only 54. So it was crazy because it was right when, I know for me personally, it was right when I had gotten into this whole Elvis thing, really. I had seen the movie the year before, and I remember someone texted me and said, sorry for your loss. And I was like, what? And then I saw the news and I was like, oh my God. Like it felt, it was so bizarre. I mean, it was so bizarre.
Especially I feel like the whole world was coming off almost like the high of like the Elvis movie. They were still kind of promoting things all the way up until the time of her passing. Elvis's birthday
was the Golden Globes, like a couple days before that.
Golden Globes were a couple of days.
Like that. Yeah.
It was the day before. And she was just at Memphis for Elvis's birthday on the 8th. And so it was all just, I feel like, a lot at one time.
Yeah.
For like the world and Elvis community.
Yeah. And so she's buried at Graceland in the meditation garden next to her son and across from her father. And like we said, shortly before passing away, she asked Riley to help her finish her memoir. And part of this is because she didn't feel that her story was worth telling.
And that was always the conversation that they had, is Lisa Marie always said, I really don't understand the point of this. What is so interesting about me? And Riley said she didn't find herself interesting, even though, of course, she was. She didn't like talking about herself. She was insecure. She wasn't sure what her value to the public was, other than being Elvis's daughter. She was so racked with self-criticism that working on the book became difficult for her. And so that's eventually when she brought Riley on to help her finish it and just get somebody else's perspective on the different events that took place in her life.
Yeah. And Riley wrote a very touching eulogy for her mom that her husband read at Lisa's funeral. And so I just wanted to read a little bit about it because I feel like it wraps up nicely, who Lisa really was from the people who knew her best. So Riley said in the eulogy, "Thank you for giving me my strength, my heart, my empathy, my courage, my sense of humor, my manners, my temper, my wildness, my tenacity. I am a product of your heart. My sisters are a product of your heart. My brother is a product of your heart. We are you. You are us, my eternal love. I hope you finally know how loved you were here. Thank you for trying so hard for us. If I didn't tell you every day, thank you. And so we just wanted to finish with talking a little bit about like what we learned about Lisa, and how this book kind of affected us. So why don't you go first?
So I feel like the book, first and foremost, kind of humanized her. I know she talks about saying, like, what is my purpose other than being Elvis's daughter? And so I think kind of separated her from that image. I think that's how we all knew her to be from the beginning. But I think through the book, we were able to see, okay, no, she's an individual, she's a mom, she's a daughter. She has all these, I guess there were like hopes and aspirations in life, the things that she wanted to accomplish from her singing career early in life to towards the end, where she wanted to do like maybe a podcast about grief and helping others deal with it, to running grief circles and just kind of wanting to be there for other people. And I think for me, that's what I ultimately took away from it. It was just a more humanized version of who she was.
Yeah, I think for me, I didn't really have a sense of who she was. Just because I had never really learned. And, all the other books that I've read, it's like no one really, like they talk about her as a kid. They don't talk about her, later, really. Jerry mentions a little bit about working with her later. But it was I was not expecting to be as like emotionally invested in the book as I was, but it was so raw, so candid, so honest. And it felt like that was who she was. She was raw and candid and honest and messy and also funny and potty mouth. But like I loved, like I felt like I learned who she was through reading her words and also Riley's perspective of her mother. And mostly I think what I learned is that she was a force and that she had a strong personality and was a very, very candid person who I would love to meet. I think she would have been a great, I feel like she would have held my attention for a long time.
Whatever, like they said, whatever Elvis had, she definitely had. And I think she used that to kind of pave her own way, kind of carve her own etch in history.
Yeah, and she was unapologetically herself. Yep. I mean, I love that. And like it made me admire Riley so much. I just like thank you to them for writing this book and giving us this insight. I mean, it was just if you haven't read it,
if you haven't read it,
the whole book for you.
But it's still, there's a lot of things that we did leave out. There were some more sensitive things I don't think we felt that we should cover personally. It's probably best to read from her own words and a lot of it like about the addiction, the different struggles that she faced. Little funny stories. We just didn't cover them because we think you should read the book and read the full story. Yeah, these are the cliff notes.
Read the book, listen to the audiobook.
The audiobook is fun.
I've done all. Recommend. Yeah. So anyway, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode, even though it was long.
Yes, and we will be bringing you the next series very soon.
Sneaky. We will announce that very soon. So
yes.
Keep your eyes peeled.
That's all we have for today. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Chronicles of the King podcast.
If you love what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback helps bring the King's story to life.
You can follow us on social media at the Chronicles of the King for updates, upcoming series, and more. We'd love to hear your input and any of your favorite Elvis moments.
Until next time, keep rocking and rolling, and we'll be back soon with more stories from Elvis's extraordinary life.
With TLC, we'll see you on the next episode of the Chronicles of the King.